Okay, so I hope you enjoyed the sortie itself. Here's the planning that went in to it. So initially when I start a plan, I decide on what my mission is going to be. What do I need to achieve in order for this to be a success? So I decided I wanted to pick two airfields that I had the scenery for, I wanted a medium level leg, and I wanted to be in Scotland. I narrowed it down to a couple of places in Scotland. I wanted to have Star Wars Valley, and I wanted to have the Loch Ness as two features that be involved. So it made sense that I started from Newcastle because I got that recently, and I've flown kind of this sort of leg coming from Yorkshire way and entering low level here to then fly around at low level. So that was my mission. That's how I set it for this sortie. In terms of fuel planning, I wasn't too worried just through experience and the fact that I knew I'd have sufficient. But if you think 30 minutes of low level will take you 600 kilos of gas, you can then work out with the remaining fuel how far you could get. So you've got a rough idea based on range. So for the medium level leg, normally to start with your targets, I haven't got any specific targets here, and I knew my entry point was going to be off to the east. So I started with the medium level leg, slightly out of order. I knew St Abbs was here, so that is an obvious VOR to use. So from Newcastle, direct to St Abbs, and then direct to the low level entry point. You can, of course, if you want, go direct from Newcastle to the low level entry point, but for the sake of 1 or 2 degrees, you may as well fly directly overhead a beacon so that you've got good confidence in your routing. Next, I would then consider what altitude I'd be flying at. So rule of thumb is to fly twice your range in altitude. It's 105 miles for the two legs at medium level. Times that by 2 will give you kind of 210 because you are flying kind of northwest, then it'd be evens, so flight level 220. Now the reason that's a rule of thumb is you don't want to go too high because then you don't have long to cruise at medium level. You want some time to level off, do your checks, and accelerate and decelerate as required to achieve your timing. You could conceivably climb a little bit higher, but there really isn't too much point to it. You can work out the details if you wish. So that's my altitude fixed. I can then think about the profile that I'm going to fly. Now you can do this a few ways. I've decided to go for the climb at 300 knots, and then once that 300 knots turns into 0.65 Mach, then I'll climb at 0.65, level off, fly at 0.65 Mach until the descent, and then I'll try accelerating to 0.8 Mach in the descent, and then converting that back to 360 knots whenever that changeover occurs. So that's my profile that I'm flying. I'll talk a little bit more about the descent in a second. So that's the climb. For the timing, so for the two legs, the rule of thumb, again, there's lots of rules of thumb because navigation planning should take, I think it's about 3 hours prior to takeoff that you get your mission, and you have to do this pretty quickly. So aviators rely on some rules of thumb. They are rules of thumb in the safe sense, so you're not going to run yourself out of fuel or time, but it allows you to get the plan together pretty quickly. So for the rule of thumb in terms of medium level, plan the timing as if you were doing 360 knots from your first waypoint to your low level entry point, and that'll account for being slightly slow on departure and maybe slightly fast on descent. So again, there's another rule of thumb in terms of timing. For fuel calculations, third rule of thumb for the day will be if you take 1,180 and minus your range, in this case 105, you can expect to enter a level with 1,075 kilos of fuel. Now, if you wish, you can dig into the planning data. So this is the FRCs, and again, I'll put a link below for the real FRCs, and you can use this, or you can use what's in the Just Flight manual. So for the normal climb with normal fuel loads, so remember you start with 1,320 kilos of fuel. You then have 60 kilos for startup, taxi, takeoff. You then have to climb up to your altitude, and then you have to descend, and then what's left, you have to work out what your cruise fuel burn will be. So for instance, we have 105 miles to travel. The first portion of that will be in the climb. So again, we've got flight level 200 and we've got flight level 250 here. You can interpolate the data, and I just went for a rough 4 minutes for the top of climb, and that was good enough for me. You can then work out how many miles that's going to work out to be, and you can work out your fuel burn. I worked that out to be about 93 to 96 kilos for the climb portion. So that's the climb taken care of. You then can look at the descent. Now you can have a tactical descent 0.8 to 420. You can have a navigation descent, which is kind of a 0.8 to 360, which is what I was doing. There's a few ways of doing it. I may have got those mixed up, but that's kind of roughly what these are. In terms of the descent, you just need to pick what sort of descent you want to do. So I wanted kind of a navigation descent, so a 0.8 and then idle at 360 knots, a combination of. And I want to do that from flight level 220. So you can interpolate the data. It'll take you about 3 minutes and 15 seconds to descend. It'll take you roughly 11 kilos of fuel. And it'll take you roughly 24 miles worth of range if you want to descend in that manner. Now, the way I kind of worked it out is based on degrees descent rates. So if you want to do a 5-degree descent, you want to descend at twice your altitude in miles. So if we were cruising at flight level 220 and I wanted a 5-degree descent, I want to start descending at 44 miles from my low level entry point. If you wait until you've got to 1.5 times your height, you're closer, you stay high for longer, then you'll want a 7-degree rate of descent or angle of descent. And therefore, you want to descend at 1.5 miles, 1.5 times your altitude. So, for instance, if we wanted to do here, you can see my descent notes on the right-hand side. 1.5 times the altitude from the low level entry point gives you about a 7-degree descent rate required. And at flight level 220, that's 33 miles from the descent, correction from your low level entry point. Now, because the leg is 49 miles long between St. Abbs and the entry point, you want to work out how many miles away from St. Abbs VOR you are to start this descent, to leave you 33 miles. So 49 is the leg length, minus the 33 miles required to descend, gives you 16 miles from St. Abbs VOR. So 16 miles on the 350 is your top of descent, which is what I've annotated up here. So that is the descent profile. I'm just looking over leg 1 notes. The reason I put leg 1 notes in detail here is because Newcastle is on a different map. I have got the map, but it's easy. I mean, you're taking off here, you're heading 343 inbound the St. Abbs head. It's fairly simple. So leg 1, 343, flight level 220, direct St. Abbs, and it's a 55-mile leg. Put some notes in, as I've just covered. Start fuel is 1320, climb, those profiles, timing, I've already mentioned, descent, I've already mentioned and included it up here, and the fuel, we've already worked that out. If you want to work out the precise fuel, you can work out your 1320 minus your 60 for startup taxi takeoff. You can work out the fuel required to climb. You can work out the fuel required to descend. And then the range at which you just have to cruise at medium level, you can then work out your fuel burn. Now, this is based on 0.75. The Just Flight manual, I think, has 0.7. It's going to be there or thereabouts. I used about a 1.5 kilos per nautical mile. You can also do it in minutes if you wish. So if I did that calculation, we'd work out to be 1,099 into low level. So that should be a quick and dirty overview of the medium level leg. Keep it simple, straight as possible, use VORs where able, work out a point to descend, and I've annotated it all here on the chart. In terms of entering low level, so for each of these boxes, these don't appear as standard. What normally appears on here is leg labels, which gives you your magnetic heading and range for each leg. And that's kind of it. You can also pull up a route card. So the route card pops up and it gives you some timing. I'll be careful with the timing, just make sure it's correct by doing a little bit of calculation. But here's where you have the timing. So what I did was I took the magnetic heading from the leg labels, which I'll remove now. I took the timing from the route card and I put the two together. So for instance, at waypoint 3, we should be there with 17 minutes and 17 seconds on the clock, and my next track should be 254. At waypoint 4, I should get there with 2 minutes and 7 on the clock because I'm going to hack at my entry point, i.e. restart the clock, and the next heading is going to be 336. So that's how I've managed the labels around here. It just makes more sense based on the techniques I use for scanning the map. Fuel at entry. So one thing I didn't mention is we expected, based on our rule of thumb, 1,075 kilos. Our minimum required is 690 kilos. So the way I worked that out is I pretended that our reserve fuel, also known as fuel on the ground, should be 200 kilos at Inverness. The recovery for the ILS, an instrument recovery, takes about 70 kilos in a Hawk. So that's 270. So you'll notice, and the recovery starts from waypoint 12 pretty much. So you'll notice that the first or the last fuel here at low level is 270 in order to complete the recovery. I then worked it back. So 20 minutes and 24, you can round it up to 21 minutes, you can round up to 22 if you want a little bit of fat on it. And then you can work that all the way back. And I worked out my minimum required to fly at low level would be 690 kilos. And then working back, what I've done for all these fuels, I haven't done them at every turn point because that'd be cluttered, but every couple of turn points, I'll just work it back versus the time. So if this took 10 minutes and 20 kilos is 200 kilos, then I'll add on. If this is 10 minutes at 20 kilos, that's 100 kilos. So you'll notice at 270, 380, it's about a 10-minute leg here. So I just work it back and it should roughly equal the same when you get back to your at level entry point. So once I've done that with the fuels, I'll then compare what I expect to the combat to be. So 385, roughly 19 minutes worth of combat. And you'll notice from the sortie, we held about 300 kilos and we were slowly eating into that ever so slightly, but not too much. So actually the modeling was pretty good in those terms. Cool. So we know we have enough fuel. We know what we expect to have in low level. We know what we need in low level, and we know how much excess fuel we have should we want to do some free nav or a practice approach somewhere. The next is picking our route at low level. So it's fairly simple. I knew I needed to get to here, and I knew I needed to get to here for my mission, Star Wars and Loch Ness. At low level, you pretty much, well, you want about a 2 to 3 minute leg. If you can get a 5-minute leg, then perfect, because then all you're doing is cruising, low level, holding your speed, holding your track, and enjoying the view. And with a bit of proficiency, you can get that down to 2 minutes fairly simply. So a nice obvious feature that I can see from medium level, my low level entry point, I can see the bays, I can see the lake, and I can see the town. I could have picked this bay here, that also stood out, but I wanted to go for something that was really obvious. I also picked something on the coast because that tends to be the lower ground. And if this was all cloud here and I couldn't get down to my altitude, if we used a safety altitude of 4,400 feet, then if I descended over the sea and I maintained clear of the coastline, I could descend down to 1,500 to 2,000 feet fairly confidently, and then turned back inbound to get my low level entry point. So that's another reason why we enter low level on the coast. So big feature, hacking at the coast. My next feature, I had an idea that I wanted to go up here and across, and these are a nice big feature, so the town stood out well. There's not a lot else. You can use forests, but I wanted something to line up with a valley that went roughly north. So this town worked out well. It's in the valley that kind of heads northeast, southwest. So I just went beyond it. It's not the best turn point because you can't turn too early because you end up overflying the town. And the feature that I picked was kind of just the road, which again isn't ideal. I could have picked the spot height, so I could have cruised down here. It's an obvious spot height with a forest on top. That was another option. But that's what I went for, and it kind of worked as we flew. As we turn north, another top tip is don't put too many waypoints in. So even though we're going to be following the valleys on the way up, I just have a waypoint here and a waypoint here at 5. My turn point here is just in the valley, so I know I'm not going to go any further beyond that. That's a nice obvious feature. I know I've got a good lake here, or a lock, as a confidence feature. So if I hit that lock and I fly to this valley, even if I can't identify this town that's here, I know I'm going to be within half a mile, so I'm happy with that. The next thing is in between. So if I want to fly this valley, I'm kind of, well, it's not quite in the valley. So as I fly this route from route study, I know I need to be slightly right of track in order to follow this valley. Then I know I'll go slightly left of track. I'll hit a large hill with a forest, and then I need to get back to this lake to go back north. So this is absolutely fine as long as you have a good route study and you know what you're looking for. So in amongst your work cycle, as soon as you turn here, you know, right, I need to be right of this forest on this spur of land and follow the valley. So Star Wars Valley is here, so I need another point here to then go into the valley. This is where I picked. Now, timing didn't work out too well. I ended up going a bit further and then turning left, which is absolutely fine. I just wanted a point that lined up roughly with the valley. So I picked the end of the forest. I could have picked here, but then I'd need another point down here, which again isn't a problem. I was just keeping it simple. Down the valley, then I wanted a nice feature here. So this is known as a funnel feature. So if I was slightly left of track or slightly right of track, I would hit a lock and I know I need to turn right. So I'll be there or thereabouts regardless. So the turn point is a town on the lock, but it's just hitting this water and turning right. Same deal coming down here, it's the end of the lock, then I'll turn right. And these are short legs. So when you have short legs, you need more route study. So I know I need to go right 333 is the heading, and then right 034, and then up this lock. Being precise in your headings here is not important. Just flying it sensibly with the aircraft is. For waypoint 10, again, end of locks, they're really obvious features. A couple of options we could do here. So at the end of this lock, you could continue up and free nav your way up this valley and then all the way up the Great Glen. Not a problem. So that is option number 2, if you like. It also should take roughly the same amount of time. So if you went ahead, you flew ahead and hit this kind of lake and then headed the same track as this, so 317. If you flew 317 here with a little bit of adjustment for mountains and then turned right onto this heading, which is 037, you'll notice it's roughly the same. We call this two sides of a square. So if we went this way and then right, or right and then left, we're still doing the same amount of turns, the same headings, and it'll work out roughly the same. I would say within about 15 to 20 seconds. There's option number 2. Option number 3 is at waypoint 10, you can go up and then take another left and go down this lock as before, but that would give you a timing penalty, kind of double backing on yourself. So from here, as I mentioned in the flight, there's a lot of high ground, undulating, not quite sure whether you're left or right of track, but the wind farms stand out really well, and the wind farms are next to a reservoir, and you fly over the reservoir. Need I say more? That obviously feeds you in. And then once you get to the Great Glen, follow it up, and then you're thinking about the recovery plan. So ideally you want to be 20, 25 miles away from the airfield when you get out of low level. You start talking to them, say, hey, this is me, I'd like a service and a recovery. So that takes time. So what I should have done was perhaps exit low level here. That gives me time to talk, squawk, and set up for the recovery. But I wanted to fly low level. So looking at the approach plates for Inverness, I know they've got 2 runways. I wanted to go for the northeast runway because it takes less time. And I know it's 051, so you'll notice that the heading here is 051 from the end of the lock, and I'm straight into the ILS. So it works out well in terms of flow. And that's all the turn points considerations. That is it. That is what I did. Other things to think about is other airfields. If you really want to play the game and have live weather, if the weather's too bad here, you could either descend over the sea or you could shoot an approach to Lucas or Dundee, and then from Dundee head kind of 01020, get to this point and then start your route. So that is a valid technique for getting to low level. You'll notice on the maps I put low level entry points, St Abbs Head, and I think it's Perth 1104. I put those radial and ranges so that if you are in cloud, it doesn't matter, you can still navigate to this point and then fly the route roughly in cloud above maybe 5,100 feet. And hopefully the cloud clears is another valid technique. Other information I put on the chart is diversion information. So I've got Dundee here, the ILS 1081, the final approach track. So if I needed to divert, I can just point in a sensible direction, pick up the ILS and do a recovery that way. You could put air traffic frequencies on. I would highly advise that if that's how you play it, but I wasn't going to talk to anyone in this case. And that is the planning overview. You can go into a lot more details if you want to go to the nth degree on the kilos. But the idea is if you have at least 300 kilos of combat, you'll eat into it slightly, but you'll still have sufficient for the route and the recovery. So that's my recommendation. Always have a little bit of combat. The other option is, and this is advanced planning of advanced execution. If you enter low level and below your minimum required, your 690, you can still complete the route as long as you're above bingo. Now, I haven't calculated a bingo for this, so I'm not going to discuss that in this case. But if we entered at 600 kilos, you need to gain 90 kilos. So you could either fly this route through the Star Wars Valley and then turn, in fact, that's probably what I do, hit the Star Wars Valley because that's my mission aim, then come out of the valley, take a right and follow this road, power lines, railway, etc. up to waypoint 10, and that should cut me off about 10 minutes, and 10 minutes at 20 kilos a minute is 100 kilos. So that's a game plan that you can route study and also action if you're short on fuel. Same deal here. Waypoint 10, you can either go to waypoint 11 or you can go direct to Inverness at medium level. You can bingo out, as they say. So climb to altitude, twice your range from the airfield you're recovering to, and then do a bingo profile recovery. So that's a little bit of advanced insight into the thought processes behind fuel management and if you're short on gas and or time indeed. So that's it. So I hope that was useful. It's a little bit of a dry subject, but I include this at the end of the video in case you're at all interested. The memory map software and charts is excellent. You can use the VFR flight freeware. The only problem is I didn't find that had any options for a map with contours, and I fly a lot of contours, especially at low level. If you're flying at 3,000, 4,000 feet from town to town, then the VFR flight software might be for you. But if you want to fly properly low level, you'll need a chart with contours so you can read the contours and follow the valleys. But that's it. So again, if you're still here, chucking a like, chucking a subscribe, please just help support the channel. Check the description for any further information and links to all the products that I use. And thank you so much for watching. Until the next time, stay safe.